In 19th century Europe, kings ruled nations, but one family financed them. They had no crown, no army, no empire on a map. Yet from Frankfurt to London, Paris to Vienna, their money moved governments, funded wars, and shaped the future of Europe. This is the story of the Rothschilds, the family that discovered the fastest way to power was not through politics, but through finance. In most history books, power wears a crown. It sits on a throne. It commands armies. It redraws borders after war. But in Europe, especially in the 19th century, there was another form of power. Quieter. Less visible. Harder to attack. It did not march in uniform. It moved through letters, ledgers, credit, gold, and trust. And few families mastered that kind of power better than the Rothschilds. Their story did not begin in a palace. It did not begin with inherited noble titles or ancient estates stretching beyond the horizon. It began in Frankfurt, in the Judengasse, the Jewish quarter, where legal restrictions shaped everyday life, movement, and opportunity. The family's own archive traces its Frankfurt roots to the Judengasse, and Meyer Amschel Rothschild, born there in 1744, is widely recognized as the founder of the banking house that his 5 sons later expanded across Europe. That beginning matters, because the Rothschilds did not simply become rich. They built something far more durable than a fortune. They built a system. A family-controlled network stretching across Europe's great financial capitals. A network that could move information faster than rivals. A network that could move gold through wartime. A network that could lend to princes, governments, and rising states at moments when access to capital meant the difference between stability and collapse. By the 19th century, the Rothschild name had become synonymous with banking influence on a continental scale. Britannica describes them as the most famous of the European banking dynasties, with considerable economic influence in Europe for roughly 2 centuries. This is not the story of a family that secretly ruled the world. That kind of language usually belongs to myth, conspiracy, and propaganda. This is a more serious story, and, in many ways, a more interesting one. It is the story of how a family from Frankfurt learned that if you could connect cities, governments, markets, and information flows better than anyone else, you did not need a crown to shape history. You only needed to become indispensable. 18th century Frankfurt was a trading city, but it was also a city of limits. For Jews living in the Judengasse, life was constrained by rules that affected where they could live, how they could move, and what opportunities they could pursue. The Rothschild archive places the family's origin in Frankfurt's Judengasse, and this setting formed the backdrop of Meyer Amschel Rothschild's early life. Meyer Amschel Rothschild was not born into European nobility. He did not inherit a state. What he developed instead was something arguably more modern, a talent for using proximity to power. He began in trade and finance, including dealing in coins and rarities, which allowed him access to elite clients. Over time, that commercial role grew into something much larger. The Rothschild archive notes that Meyer Amschel became a court agent to numerous princes and managed finances connected to the Elector of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest rulers in Europe. That transition is crucial, because in the late 18th century, banking was not simply about having money. It was about trust. It was about discretion. It was about being useful to rulers who needed reliable men to move wealth, store wealth, convert wealth, and protect wealth. Money is never just money. It is organization. It is relationships. It is speed. It is information. It is confidence. A gold coin in a box is wealth. But a network that can mobilize millions across borders is power. By 1810, Meyer Amschel had formalized the family firm as M.A. Rothschild & Son, bringing his sons into partnership. That detail matters because it shows he was not just running a prosperous business, he was engineering succession. He was designing continuity. Many rich men build fortunes. Very few build dynasties. Meyer was thinking in dynastic terms. The masterstroke of the Rothschild story was not merely that Meyer had talented sons. It was that he placed them strategically. His 5 sons became associated with the key branches of the family's expanding operations in Frankfurt, London, Vienna, Naples, and Paris. Both Britannica and the Rothschild archive describe this Europe-wide family structure as the foundation of the dynasty's rise. Think about how radical this was for the time. Today, global business networks are normal. Multinational banks are expected. Instant communication is taken for granted. But in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, this was extraordinary. Most firms were local or, at most, nationally anchored. The Rothschilds were building something transnational before modern communications, before electronic markets, before central banking had matured into its later form. Each brother was not merely opening a branch office. Each one became a node in a family-controlled intelligence and finance web. Frankfurt remained the ancestral center. London became critical because Britain was emerging as a dominant financial and imperial power. Vienna mattered because of Habsburg politics and continental diplomacy. Paris mattered because France remained central to European finance and power. Naples extended reach into southern Europe. This arrangement gave the family several huge advantages. First, it created geographic spread. If one market seized up, another might remain active. Second, it created information depth. News from Paris, London, Vienna, and Frankfurt could be compared, interpreted, and acted upon through family correspondence and trusted agents. Third, it created credibility. Governments and elite clients knew the Rothschilds were not just one local banker, they were a house with reach. And fourth, it created trust at the core of the system. In an era when communication was slow and enforcement across borders was difficult, trust inside the network mattered immensely. A family partnership reduced some of the risks that would exist in a looser commercial alliance. This is one reason historians so often emphasize the structure of the family business. Encyclopedia.com notes that the Rothschild Bank stood out because it could handle large-scale transactions in multiple markets and financial centers, unlike many competitors. In other words, the Rothschilds were not simply rich bankers. They were systems builders. Their genius was operational. They looked at Europe and saw not a map of separate kingdoms, but a map of connected opportunities. In the early 19th century, the speed of information could create immense financial advantage. Markets moved on reports from battlefields, cabinet rooms, courts, trade routes, and bond issues. Governments made decisions slowly. Bureaucracies moved slowly. News often arrived late, incomplete, or distorted. The Rothschilds worked to solve that problem. They developed networks of couriers, agents, correspondents, and commercial contacts that allowed them to gather and transmit intelligence across borders far more effectively than many rivals. Sources describing the family's rise consistently point to the value of this network in moving both information and funds across Europe. That gave them a structural edge. And here is where many popular retellings oversimplify the story. This is why information and reputation fed each other. The more efficiently they handled difficult transactions, the more governments trusted them. The more governments trusted them, the more sensitive work they received. The more sensitive work they received, the more central they became. That feedback loop is how banking houses become institutions. Long before the modern language of data advantage, the Rothschilds had grasped the principle. Whoever sees the continent clearly can finance the continent more effectively than anyone else. Wars destroy lives, cities, and treasuries. They also reveal who can actually operate under pressure. For the Rothschilds, the Napoleonic era was a proving ground. During the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan Meyer Rothschild in London became especially important in organizing bullion transfers and subsidy payments connected to Britain's war effort and its continental allies. Multiple sources note that the family's cross-border structure allowed it to move funds and gold through a fractured Europe more effectively than most rivals. This was not glamorous work. It was difficult, high-risk, logistical finance. And that is precisely why it mattered. Governments at war need more than battlefield courage. They need liquidity. They need reliable payments. They need secure transfers. They need someone who can make money arrive where promises alone are useless. Nathan's role in London became central because London itself was becoming central, not just politically, but financially. Britain's capacity to subsidize allies and sustain military pressure depended partly on the mechanisms that could transmit resources across borders. Here the Rothschild network excelled. They were able to move bullion across dangerous conditions. They could coordinate between family branches and agents. They could combine local knowledge with continental reach. This is the part of the story that often gets lost beneath sensationalism. The real feat was not some cartoon image of bankers magically profiting from war. The real feat was competence at scale. If you could reliably move gold and arrange payments during one of Europe's most destabilizing conflicts, rulers would remember you after the cannon stopped. Because wartime finance creates peacetime prestige. Once a banker proves useful in a crisis, governments are more likely to rely on that banker later for loans, refinancing, and major public borrowing. And that is exactly the transition the Rothschilds were positioned to make. War did not create the family from nothing. Maya's foundations were already in place. But war revealed how powerful that foundation had become. The legend is famous. Nathan Rothschild supposedly learned of Napoleon's defeat before everyone else, manipulated the market, and made an enormous fortune in a single stroke. It is a dramatic story. It is cinematic. It is endlessly repeated. The problem is that the evidence for the most sensational versions is weak. The Rothschild archive states plainly that the evidence for the claim that Nathan made her million-odd millions from early Waterloo news is slender. Britannica also traces how later anti-Semitic conspiracy theories amplified and distorted the story. And that matters, because serious history has to separate verifiable advantage from legend. Did the Rothschilds have strong information networks? Yes. Did Nathan have valuable speed advantages in receiving and interpreting news? Very likely, yes. But the dramatic image of one secret dispatch instantly creating the entire dynasty is misleading. The family was already wealthy and already rising before Waterloo. Sources note that they had significant financial strength before the battle and were already deeply involved in bullion and wartime finance. So why does the myth endure? Because people like to compress complicated systems into one magical moment. But the truth is more instructive. The Rothschilds did not become powerful because of one trick. They became powerful because their network repeatedly gave them advantages in communication, coordination, and execution. Waterloo matters less as a get-rich-quick anecdote than as a symbol. It symbolizes the reputation they had earned. A house positioned close to the nerve centers of European finance, capable of moving quicker than others, and trusted with enormous responsibility. For your audience, this is actually a stronger angle. Myth makes for a good thumbnail. Systems make for a great documentary. And the real Rothschild achievement was systemic. After wartime success came the next stage of power, sovereign finance. If wartime proved the Rothschilds could deliver under pressure, the post-war years proved they could shape the architecture of European borrowing. That is not a footnote. That is a description of structural influence. Because once a family banking house becomes associated with large sovereign loans, it moves into a different league. It is no longer merely serving wealthy individuals. It is helping states finance themselves. And when states borrow, they are not borrowing for decoration. They borrow to stabilize budgets, to refinance obligations, to rebuild after war, to fund infrastructure, to preserve credibility. That puts the lender in a sensitive position. Not all power is visible. Some power is embedded in dependency. A ruler may wear the uniform. A minister may sign the decree. But if a government cannot secure funds on acceptable terms, its room to act narrows rapidly. The Rothschilds understood this deeply. They were not replacing governments. They were becoming essential to how governments functioned financially. And that is one reason their name carried such weight across 19th century Europe. The next phase of Rothschild influence came not from war, but from modernization. As the 19th century advanced, Europe was being rebuilt and reimagined through infrastructure, railways, mining, and industrial expansion. Sources on the family emphasize that Rothschild capital played a significant role in railways and industrial development, especially in France and beyond. This is another reason the family matters historically. They were not just custodians of old wealth. They were financiers of the modern world. Railways were not a side project. They changed everything. They changed travel times. They changed trade routes. They changed military mobility. They changed the integration of national economies. To finance railways was to finance the remaking of Europe itself. And here again, the Rothschild structure gave them an edge. They could connect capital across borders. They had relationships with states and elites. They had credibility in major markets. They knew how to assess long-term projects that required both patience and scale. This is what old financial power often looks like at its highest level. Not endless public attention. Not flamboyant consumption. But the capacity to direct capital into the bones of a civilization. Roads, rails, loans, markets, state finance, these are not just financial categories. They are the machinery of historical transformation. The Rothschilds were deeply woven into that machinery. At this point, the obvious question is, why them? Why did this particular family rise so far above others? The answer is not because they were lucky. Luck can create a windfall. It cannot sustain a multinational dynasty for generations. The family model worked for several reasons. First, trust. In high finance, especially before modern regulation and instant communication, trust reduced friction. A network of brothers could often move with a speed and confidence that looser partnerships could not. Second, discipline. The Rothschilds behaved like long-term stewards, not just traders hunting quick profit. Third, reputation. Once a house becomes known for competence under pressure, elite clients return. Fourth, diversification across geography. The family was never dependent on one city alone. Fifth, continuity. Meyer Amschel built not just a business, but a succession mechanism. In that sense, the Rothschild model resembled aristocratic power while remaining commercially modern. Aristocrats preserved influence through bloodline, marriage, inheritance, and institutional memory. The Rothschilds preserved financial influence through many of those same dynastic instincts, but applied to banking. This is part of why they so often feel like the perfect old money case study. Their wealth was not merely possessed. It was managed, guarded, distributed strategically, and embedded into a family structure designed for survival. Modern audiences often expect wealth to advertise itself. Today, money frequently performs. It posts. It signals. It brands itself. But the older European style of wealth operated differently. The Rothschilds became associated not just with money, but with privacy. That privacy was practical. In finance, discretion reassures clients. In politics, discretion avoids unnecessary enemies. In society shaped by prejudice, discretion can also be protective. The family's public image was never merely a matter of taste. It was tied to survival, control, and continuity. That is why old money as an idea often values understatement. Not because wealth dislikes beauty or luxury, but because durable wealth tends to be strategic. It understands that visibility attracts pressure. The Rothschilds embodied this principle in a way that fascinates audiences even now. They were famous, but also elusive. Powerful, but often indirect. Central, but rarely theatrical. And that combination made them seem even more powerful. Any family that becomes this wealthy, this visible, and this historically consequential will attract myths. In the Rothschild case, those myths often became ugly. Britannica documents how anti-Semitic conspiracy theories distorted the family's history, especially through lurid claims about secret domination and manipulation. This part of the story should be handled carefully. There is a difference between saying a banking dynasty had enormous influence, which it did, and repeating conspiratorial fantasies that treat complex historical events as the product of one hidden hand. Serious history does not need exaggeration. The verifiable story is already remarkable. A family from Frankfurt built a Europe-wide network. It financed states. It moved bullion during war. It arranged major government loans. It helped finance infrastructure and industrial development. It became one of the most famous banking dynasties in European history. That is enough. In fact, it is more than enough. Because when the evidence is this strong, myth only weakens the story. No dynasty remains at its peak forever. The world that had made the Rothschild model so powerful began to change. States evolved. Financial markets deepened. Central banks and public institutions developed. New corporate forms and new concentrations of capital emerged. The age in which a family partnership could stand so singularly at the center of continental finance began to pass. But decline should not be confused with disappearance. The Rothschild name remained powerful, and the family adapted through later generations in different countries and sectors. Even where individual branches changed, were nationalized, or restructured, the historic legacy of the dynasty endured. And that legacy is larger than one surname. The Rothschilds helped define what modern international finance could look like. Cross-border, information-driven, reputation-based, politically connected, operationally sophisticated. They demonstrated that the architecture of finance could itself become a form of geopolitical influence. Not by replacing states, but by becoming essential to how states borrowed, paid, stabilized, and expanded. So, did the Rothschilds rule Europe? Not in the simplistic sense. They were not monarchs. They did not command all governments. They did not control history like puppeteers. But in the deeper and more historically serious sense, they did exercise extraordinary influence over Europe's financial life. And in certain eras, financial influence can rival political power. Because kings may issue orders. Ministers may make speeches. Armies may win battles. But none of that lasts without money, credit, logistics, and confidence. The Rothschilds understood that earlier than almost anyone else. They saw that the future belonged not only to those who possessed wealth, but to those who could organize wealth across borders. They built a family into a network. They turned trust into leverage. They turned information into speed. They turned speed into advantage. And they turned advantage into one of the most enduring dynasties in financial history. That is why their story still matters. Not because it proves one family secretly controlled everything, but because it reveals something more realistic and more powerful. In modern history, the people who shape the world are not always the ones standing in front of it. Sometimes, they are the ones financing it.